6 feet above your fuel tank right now sits something that could replace every gallon of gasoline you will ever buy for the rest of your life. It grows in soil that requires no special treatment, no advanced technology, and no connection to any power grid. And for over 80 years, you were told this plant had nothing to do with fuel. Not because it does not work, but because it works too well. Because what this plant produces is not just one alternative to petroleum. It produces two. One for diesel engines, one for gasoline engines. And once you understand how both of those fuels come from a single harvest, you will understand why an entire industry spent decades making sure you never connected the dots. Because this was never about safety. It was about control. And it starts with a number that came out of a laboratory in 2010 that should have made global headlines, but it did not. At the University of Connecticut, a team of researchers took a simple question that most engineers had stopped asking decades earlier. What happens if you take oil from a plant and run it through the exact same process used to create modern biodiesel? No modifications, no proprietary technology, no corporate infrastructure, just raw plant oil and chemistry. The plant they chose was hemp, industrial hemp, a crop that had been grown across America for centuries, before disappearing almost overnight. When the researchers processed the oil using standard transesterification, the result was not partial success. It was not a marginal alternative. It was 97% conversion efficiency. That means nearly every drop of oil extracted from the plant became usable fuel, clean burning, standards compliant, and in some cases, outperforming conventional biodiesel in cold temperatures. Now pause for a moment and think about what that actually means. A single plant, grown in a field, converted with basic chemistry, producing fuel that meets the same standards as the product sold at every gas station in the country. And yet, you have never once been told you could do this yourself. To understand why, you have to go back to the moment when fuel stopped being something people could produce and became something they had to buy. Because the engine sitting in your car right now was never designed for petroleum in the first place. It was designed for plants. In the late 1800s, a German engineer named Rudolf Diesel was working on a problem that had nothing to do with oil. He wanted to build an engine that was more efficient than steam, more reliable, more accessible, something that could run on fuels available to ordinary people, not just industrial corporations. When he completed his design and demonstrated it publicly at the 1900 World Exposition in Paris, he did not use petroleum. He used peanut oil, and it worked, smoothly, quietly, without modification. Diesel himself wrote that his engine could run on vegetable oils and would allow farmers to produce their own fuel, creating independence instead of dependency. That was the original vision, an engine powered by agriculture, not industry, but that vision did not survive, because within a decade, something changed. Petroleum companies began refining crude oil into diesel fuel at scale. Fuel systems were adjusted, standards were rewritten, and slowly, the idea that engines could run on anything other than petroleum disappeared, not because it stopped working, but because something more profitable replaced it. Now fast forward to the present, because diesel engines are only half the story. And this is where the second fuel changes everything. When you harvest hemp, you are not just collecting seeds, you are collecting an entire plant structure made of cellulose, fibrous material that most people assume has no value once the oil is extracted. But that assumption is wrong, because cellulose is not waste, it is raw fuel. Through a process called cellulosic fermentation, that plant material can be broken down into simple sugars. Those sugars are then fermented, distilled, and converted into ethanol. The exact same type of ethanol already blended into the gasoline you buy at the pump today. Every gallon of standard fuel in the United States already contains up to 10% ethanol. The only difference is where that ethanol comes from. Right now, it comes from corn. But it does not have to, because hemp produces both oil for diesel and biomass for ethanol from the same acre of land. One plant, two fuels, two types of engines, zero waste. And this is not a modern discovery. This was understood nearly a century ago. In 1908, Henry Ford designed the Model T to run on multiple fuel types, gasoline, ethanol, or any mixture of both, because at the time, farmers were already producing alcohol fuel locally. Ford believed that would be the future, not centralized fuel production, but decentralized energy grown directly from the land. He even stated publicly that fuel would one day come from crops, waste materials, and agricultural byproducts. And he did more than talk about it. He built it. In 1941, Ford unveiled a prototype vehicle made partly from agricultural materials, including hemp fibers, and designed to run on plant-based fuel. It was lighter, stronger, and completely aligned with a system where energy could be produced without oil. But that system never took hold, because by the time Ford showed it to the world, the rules had already been rewritten. In 1937, a law was passed in the United States that changed everything. The Marijuana Tax Act, a law that, on paper, targeted a narcotic, but in practice, it eliminated an entire agricultural industry. The key detail is not the law itself, it is the language used, because the word marijuana was not commonly used in America at the time. Farmers knew the plant as hemp. Doctors knew it as cannabis, but the term used in the law was unfamiliar. It was deliberately unfamiliar because it severed the connection between a useful crop and the legislation that would remove it. And when that connection was broken, the consequences were immediate. Hemp production collapsed, fuel research stopped, and an entire category of plant-based industry disappeared from public awareness. At the exact same time, another system was expanding: petroleum, fuel distribution networks, gas stations, refineries, supply chains that required constant consumption to remain profitable. Because unlike a crop, oil cannot be grown locally. It must be extracted, transported, refined, and sold. And once that system was in place, anything that threatened it had to disappear. But here is the part that most people never hear. Even during that transition, plant-based fuel was already working at scale. In the late 1930s, a fuel called agar-oil was being sold across the American Midwest, blended ethanol gasoline, available at thousands of service stations. Farmers were producing it, drivers were using it, and it worked until it did not. Within just a few years, those stations disappeared, production stopped, and petroleum became the default. Not because the alternative failed, but because it was pushed out. And for decades after that, the knowledge faded, except in one place. Because there was one community that never fully let go of it, not because they resisted change, but because they understood something most people forgot. The Amish. In places like Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, families had been growing hemp for generations, long before modern industry, long before centralized fuel systems. And when the laws changed, they adapted. But they did not forget, because knowledge passed down quietly does not disappear the way public knowledge does. And when hemp became legal again in the United States, that knowledge returned almost immediately, not as a theory, but as a practice. Because the process itself is not complicated. Oil is pressed from seeds, converted using basic chemistry, and used in engines exactly as intended. The rest of the plant is fermented, distilled, and turned into ethanol. Everything from a single harvest. No dependency on external supply chains. No reliance on global pricing. No requirement for continuous purchase. Just fuel, grown from the ground. And that is the part that changes everything. Because once you understand that this system works, the question is no longer whether it is possible. The question becomes why you were never told. Why a solution that has existed for over a century, that can be produced locally, that can power both diesel and gasoline engines, was removed from education, from infrastructure, and from public conversation, because systems that create independence do not generate recurring revenue, and industries built on consumption depend on exactly the opposite. But the physics has not changed, the chemistry has not changed, and the plant has not changed. The only thing that changed was what people were allowed to know. And now you do. If you could grow 1 acre of fuel, what would you power first? Your car? Your generator? Your entire home? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see what this same plant can do outside of fuel, there is something even bigger coming next. Stay tuned.